Hello, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to Coding in the Natural World. I am Matthew Fairber, and this is Aaron Poteet, and we are here at the beautiful North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences in downtown Raleigh, in our laboratory, the Visual World Investigate Lab, a free lab that you can visit to learn about technology and science and take classes and do field trips and all sorts of fun stuff related to natural sciences and technology. Today, what you're going to be doing is we're going to be talking to several researchers here at the museum and learn about how they use computer programming in their daily lives and in their profession, how it has helped them, and give you an opportunity to ask them questions as well. So here's how it's going to work. We're going to play some videos for each of the scientists so you can learn a little bit about them. And then afterwards, we're going to go live with them, at which point you can enter in the chat where you're from, who you are, and what your question is. We'll do that for each of our researchers. And then at the end, we'll have a big live session where we can again have an extra last chance to ask any questions that you all might have before we wrap up here around 2 o'clock. So thank you for visiting today. Let's tell you a little bit about ourselves. My name is Matthew, like I said, and I went to school for environmental sciences. I did not learn computer programming formally or electronics or anything like that. That's all something that I learned on my own, just because it was something I'd always been interested in. And I think you're going to find that that's a common theme. It's certainly possible to take classes in computer programming, and we teach them. We think that they're a great idea. However, technology, among all the sciences and topics, is a little unique in that you can learn it and become extremely good at it just on your own, using lots of free resources online. One of the resources that you'll hear from us, and we'll put at the end of the program, one of our favorites is code.org, who we're doing this in partnership with. Code.org is a great site that will help connect you with different programs and free resources to learn computer programming in almost any language that you can think of at your own pace or in a more structured, timely type of session. So computer programming we use here in the lab to build exhibits with. We build museum exhibits with touchscreens. We build exhibits that are based around electronics. We do a lot of robotics and electronics. And we also teach using it as well. Because when you learn computer programming, it gives you a real leg up when you're looking for careers and looking for jobs, because few people learn how to do it. There are many, many more jobs that require computer programming than there are people that actually have those skills. So if you learn how to do programming, doesn't matter which language you start with, if you learn it, then you have a real advantage over a lot of other people. And you may just find that you enjoy it. Because if you're anything like me or us, you'll find that it's very rewarding to be able to create something from scratch, have the idea, type it out, and then have something in the real world that can do something. It's extremely rewarding. So that's a little bit about myself. Aaron.
Yes, and I'm Aaron, and something you'll see here is we all have different sciences backgrounds. For instance, I was an archaeologist before this. I didn't go to school for coding, but as with almost every science, you'll find that coding can make your life a lot easier. So most of us learn it on our own or learn it in a class during grad school or while working on a PhD. But one of the great things about coding is anyone can do it. You can do it sitting there at home, and you can learn just like we did by using different free resources available online, kind of like code.org. And so, as Matthew was saying, here at the museum, one of the fun things we do in this lab, and we're open to the public. The museum and this lab are open and we're free, so you can come visit us if you're ever in Raleigh, North Carolina. But one of the things we really like to do here is build robots. And we use coding for this. It's really easy to learn about, and eventually we'll have up a YouTube series that can show you how to get started building your own robots, and we'll have a link to that later on in the chat.
Yes, so please stay tuned for that. So we're going to move on to our first researcher. His name is Dr. Patrick Troyhart, and first let's learn a little bit about him. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and something about your favorite projects that you've been working on?
Sure. My name is Patrick Troyhart. I am the assistant head of the Astronomy and Astrophysics Research Lab at the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences. And I I'm an astronomer. I enjoy studying spiral galaxies and understanding their shapes and structures and what that can tell us about things that are harder to measure within a galaxy itself. So some of the underlying physics that create those shapes and structures that we see and how they're related to other things within a galaxy. And so one of my favorite projects is actually a project that just ended, and it's a citizen science project called Spiralgraph. And what we did was we had people look at thousands of spiral galaxies, and we had them essentially trace out the spiral structure they saw within each one of these images. So that way we could measure the spiral structure of these galaxies. And what we've seen previously in what previous astronomers have done was they've found a relationship between the tightness of the wrapping of the spiral arms in spiral galaxies and the masses of the supermassive black hole in the centers of galaxies, the amount of dark matter within a galaxy, the size of the bulge within a galaxy, and a few other parameters. And the reason why it's interesting is because measuring the spiral structure of a galaxy is actually pretty easy, and it can be done very quickly. Whereas trying to measure the mass of a supermassive black hole, the amount of dark matter, the mass of the bulge in a galaxy, that's all more complicated and harder to do. It takes a lot of telescope time, which is essentially expensive. And in order to do that, you have to spend a lot of time with a large telescope on each galaxy. Whereas we can just take thousands of images and just kind of run through them very, very quickly and measure these parameters.
How has coding helped you in your field?
So astronomy is basically all coding at this point. Back in the early days, astronomy could be done without computers. It could be done with pencil and paper or things like that. But nowadays, with digital imaging, everything is digital at this point in astronomy. So there's really no way to do astronomy anymore without actual coding involved. And especially with the large amounts of data that are now available, you really need to be able to do some programming in order to do this. So one thing we've done is with that citizen science project is, so here's an example. Let me see if I can turn this a little bit. So the image that you see here, which is you may not be able to see very well, but that's also good because in reality it's kind of hard to see what this image is anyway. But this is an image of a spiral galaxy. And the issue is in this image, the galaxy itself is not much brighter than the background. And so it's hard to see the structure in the galaxy. But what we do is we show this image to volunteers. We have volunteers trace out that spiral structure. And so we know the coordinates of each one of the points that the volunteers traced out. And we take every volunteer's tracings, which is done independently. And then what we do, we stack all those tracings on top of each other and create a composite image, which is what you can see right here. And this is the result of 15 people independently tracing the image of the spiral galaxy, and creates this resultant kind of composite image. And again, we had to write the code in order to do that, in order to add all that together and create this image.
Are there any big questions or mysteries in your field that someone with coding experience might be able to help you answer?
Yeah, so again, like I said, astronomy nowadays is just, it's all computer programming. And the issue is that bigger telescopes are coming online in the near future. And one of these telescopes is predicted to produce about 1 terabyte of data per night. And that is way more data than any person could actually analyze and look at, individually. So the issue is that we now have to create programs and essentially artificial intelligence to sift through all of this data night by night to pick out the useful information, the things that people are interested in, or at least flag it. So that way astronomers can actually get out the information that they want. Because essentially creating 1 terabyte of data or more per night results in tremendous storage issues as well. So so astronomers will then have to start deleting data as well. So we need to be able to quickly and efficiently sift through all that data and determine what's useful and what isn't before it actually, gets deleted and replaced. So that's one issue. I mean, that's one practical issue that's going to come up in the near future that people are working on right now. But also, I mean, just in general, there really is a tremendous amount of freely available astronomy imaging data available right now. And there's more data than can actually be analyzed. So there are a lot of citizen science projects now kind of sifting through that data where they just have volunteers looking at images and identifying specific things that astronomers are interested in. But also there's, people are developing AI programs as well to kind of help measure parameters and like thousands of images. So there's actually a lot. There's actually a lot that can be done with computer programming in astronomy at this point. I mean, it's basically all computer programming at this point.
And we are live here with Dr. Troyhart. This is the time for you to ask any questions that you might have for him. Just enter them in the chat along with your school name if you wouldn't mind, and we'll ask anything that you'd like. But let's get started with a couple questions that I have. Dr. Troyhart, how did you start learning how to computer program?
Well, I started actually in high school. I took a learning course for computer programming, and we learned Pascal, which was just not a very useful language. It just kind of introduced you into like syntax and the logic of coding and things like that. But beyond that, I took like one class in C++ in community college, and beyond that, I just learned coding on my own. And so I've just kind of picked it up over the years and kind of developed my skill that way.
Fantastic. And did you find that to be difficult when you first started?
Well, when I first started, no, not really, because I was really interested in math, and it just the logical process of a computer program just seemed to make a lot of sense to me, because it was just first step, second step, third step. It's almost like a cookbook in a way. So I actually found that to be kind of easy. It's just a matter of kind of planning out what you want to do. Like when I code, I'm building much larger programs that do specific things, and you kind of have to map out either on paper or in your head what you want it to do, and kind of know the steps that you need to do in order to get it to do what you want it to do. So it becomes more complex now. Yeah.
That's a really good point. Yes, computer programs and computers, they're only as smart as you program them, and they can't guess what you're trying to do. So yes, you've got to think through every single step.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's see. Oh, we've got one question in here from Pequannock, New Jersey. Apologies if I'm not pronouncing that correctly. I'm sure I'm not. How do you take pictures in space? Ariana.
Well, thanks for the question. So we use telescopes. So we can use telescopes either on the ground or in space, and it's basically like a digital camera nowadays. I mean, it's just digital cameras have these charge coupled devices, which are these chips in them that basically record the numbers of photons, the amount of light that's exposed onto it, and that's basically all we do is we just basically put a camera at the end of a giant lens, like a telescope, and then we just photograph the sky and do it that way.
Fantastic. And with the visible light?
We use all different types of spectra. So we use visible, we use radio, we use gamma ray. So we break up the entire electromagnetic spectrum into tiny little chunks, because each chunk actually gives us different information.
That's right. Right. So yes, in the spectrum, we can only see a very small part of the spectrum, the visible portion. However, there are places outside of the visible spectrum that can penetrate dust clouds more easily, for example, see further. And so yes, many different types of telescopes. Okay, we've got another question here. What problems do you face while tracing the spiral images? This comes from Muhammad Ali Ansari.
Well, there are a lot of issues. Just because people, everybody's different, right? So there are always issues as to what people see. If people follow the directions that we set forward, were our directions clear enough for people to actually follow them the way we want them to? Things like that. It's like different people's interpretation of the directions, interpretations of the images. But generally, like in the image that you saw in the video, that spiral structure, that really clearly defined spiral structure on the black background, that's actually really good. I mean, people generally, like 90% of the time, people agree with where things are, and so you can see that clearly in the spiral structure that's seen there. So it actually works out really well.
Great. Okay. And last question here, again from Pequannock, New Jersey. Alexis asks, how long did it take you to learn how to code?
Well, I mean, it's a continuous learning process. I mean, you're always learning how to code. I switched, somewhat recently, I switched from one programming language that I've been using for years to Python now. And so, I mean, overall coding, the general idea of coding is the same across all languages. It's just the syntax and the way you write it turns out to be different in the different languages. And so it's taken me a little bit to learn Python because Python is very powerful and a lot of things are kind of built into it already. And so it makes things much easier if you know how to do it. You don't actually have to create a lot of things. A lot of things have already been created, and you can just use these tools. So Python now, I've been working on and off on that for about a year now, but I feel like I'm progressing pretty well.
Great. Yeah, some of you may be familiar with terms like plugins and extension packs for games and different programs. Well, in coding, you kind of have the same thing. Yes, it's very rare for you to write a program from scratch and have it be 100% your code. Oftentimes, you'll find a starting point that someone else has started already that you can begin with. Or after you start something, you can take snippets of code from other places to incorporate it into yours. That's a really good point. We'll ask another question here from St. Clement's School in Toronto. What programming language do you use? And have the programs ever detected unusual, possibly alien data?
So for most of what I've done, I've worked in a proprietary programming language called IDL. And it's a programming language that lets you very easily create graphs and manipulate image data and things like that. But the problem is it costs money. You always have to constantly renew a license. And it seems like everybody and everything is transitioning to Python or has transitioned, and I'm kind of late to the game. And so now I've actually picked up Python, and it actually works really well. And it's free, it's open, there's tons of resources out there in order to learn it. So now I code mostly in Python. But yeah, have I found anything like interesting like that? No, I haven't. Sorry. I wish I did, but no.
You would be very famous.
Yeah,
We would all know him.
Yeah, you would have heard of me.
Yeah, something like that would not be kept secret because who wouldn't want to be the one to make that discovery and become famous for all time? Yes, Python, and Python is extremely popular. It's one of the most popular languages in recent years. It's used in the sciences, but it's used outside of the sciences as well. So that's a good one to look into. Maybe kind of a tough one to start with, depending upon how you learn things. But it doesn't really matter which language you start with. There's so many different types of languages, and they're all so similar that really, if you can just start with, you could start with a very simple one and learn all the basics you need, and then all the rest become a lot easier. Okay, I think we need to move on to the next researcher here. We're going to move on to Dr. Julie Borvath. So let's learn a little bit about her and her work, and then you can ask some questions. So as we're playing this video, that's a good time for you to start thinking about questions you might have, and go ahead and enter them into the chat. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and something about your favorite projects that you've been working on?
Yes. Hello, my name is Dr. Julie Borvath, and I am jointly appointed between the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences in downtown Raleigh, North Carolina, and at the North Carolina Central University, which is in Durham, North Carolina. And I study a lot of different aspects of primate genetics and the skin microbes that live on some of these primates. And one of my favorite projects was actually looking at the microbes that live on the skin in the armpit. So if you want to see, here's an example of one of the plates that we get where we swabbed primates and collected the microbes that live on their skin in their armpit. And then we actually plated them out and grew them up in the lab so we could study them. And so this project is really important because it tells us a little bit about what lives on different primates, and we can compare that to humans. And then it also tells us that these microbes that live on us produce our body odor, and body odor is really important to choose a mate, but it's also really important because there are some insects that can bite you, and such as mosquitoes, and those are attracted to the way you smell as well. So if we could figure out which microbes live on you and how to change those, we could maybe change the way you smell and change, if you can get a better mate and or reduce the mosquitoes that bite you.
How has coding helped you in your field?
Great question. Coding is really important for my field. So if you can imagine, we study microbes that live on these different primates, and you can see there are many microbes on this petri dish. And so there are thousands and thousands of microorganisms that live on each animal or each person that we swab. And there are so many microbes that live there, it's really hard for us to study them individually. So what we do is we actually sequence their DNA, and then we study little pieces of their sequence using different coding mechanisms. And then we study those and compare those between the different people or the different primates to try and understand which microbes live there and what they're doing.
Are there any big questions or mysteries in your field that someone with coding experience might be able to help you answer?
My field is still early on in the microbiome realm, so we often know which microbes live on different people or in different places, but we often don't know what those microorganisms do. And so we're studying these bacteria and fungi that live on different animals in different environments, and we really need to use coding to try and tell us which things live in different places, and then try and connect that to why they might live in one place versus another. So there's still a lot of information to try and figure out and help us understand which microbes live on different people and animals, how that connects to disease, whether you're going to get an infection from one of these microbes, or how that connects to whether or not mosquitoes will bite you more or less based on the way you smell, based on the microbes that live on you. So there's a vast realm of possibilities for using computer science and genetics and microbiology.
And we're back here with Dr. Horvath. Dr. Horvath, we have some questions here ready for you. The first question here is, why did you choose your field? Oh,
Great question. Do you want me to wait?
Okay. All right. Dr. Horvath, why did you choose your field is the first question.
Great question. Well, I was really intrigued by genetics, so I'm in the genetics field. I was trained as a human geneticist, and I was really interested in how DNA sequence changes can actually change the way you look or act. And so I started studying genetics and got interested in that as a field. And genetics really uses a lot of coding in order to study sequences and compare sequences between different species. So that's how I got into coding and was just in love with the genetics aspect, the mystery aspect. I kind of thought it was like being a detective.
Fantastic. We've got some more questions coming in. Don't forget to enter where you're coming from, what school you're from, and a name if you'd like. What made you want to start coding?
Great question. Well, a lot of my field uses coding. So like I said, I'm in genetics, but I also do microbiology, and both of those rely heavily on studying DNA sequences. And in order to study thousands and thousands of sequences, you need to be able to analyze them with a computer because you can't do that on your own. So I really needed to use coding in order to study all the research results that I was getting.
Very good. Okay. Here's a question. We're going to ask this of everyone. How did you learn coding to begin with, and did you find it hard?
I did find it hard. I didn't actually like coding to start with. I started in college and I learned Fortran, which is a language most people don't use now. And I started in that language and then moved into another one called Perl, which was used for quite a long time in the genetics realm. And now I also use Python like Dr. Troyhart. So that's one of the most common ones we use now. And we also use a lot of modules that other people have written. So I don't do a lot of my own code writing necessarily, but I use other people's code and stitch it together to try and make a code script that I can actually use to analyze all of my data.
And you probably have to tweak it sometimes, right?
I do, yes, definitely, and change parameters to make it work for what I need.
Yeah, and I see that was someone's question was whether you use Python or not. That was from Martha.
Yeah, that's a great one. So I'd say that's a good language to learn right now because a lot of different fields use Python.
Yes. Okay. All right. So let's see. You answered which ones you're using, and so in your field, is Python maybe the most useful one to learn, or do you have another recommendation?
I would say right now, probably Python is one of the best ones to use. It does change. So like I said, when I started, everyone was using Perl, and now it's changed to Python, which is similar to Perl. But definitely stay up with what is the most useful in the field because it changes over time. And so you just have to kind of stay current with knowing what's published and in the literature and what's used by other scientists.
Right. And that might seem like a hassle, but again, remember what I said. Once you learn one, then all the rest, they're called different languages, but really you should think of them as different dialects because they're all so very similar. use different punctuation, and maybe tabs need to be in different places, and function names might be a little different, but the concept and the basics are all the same. So a couple more questions here from Ariana in New Jersey. Can coding help bring back extinct animals?
Great question. Well, there are some scientists who are trying to bring back extinct animals. And what you first need is DNA from those extinct animals to figure out what it looked like and how it acted. And so we are now studying the sequences of some extinct animals because we can get ancient DNA and then compare it to modern day animals that are currently alive that were related to that animal. So for example, the woolly mammoth, we can look at animals that are related to that and try and figure out which sequences were just woolly mammoth specific sequences and try and maybe create that as an organism. So that is something that people are doing. I think it has a lot of challenges, and sometimes we don't know the entire sequence of, say, the woolly mammoth. We have bits of it. We have pieces, large pieces of DNA, but we don't have the complete genome sequence. So that's one of the challenges. How do we actually fill in those gaps that we don't have? And what happens if we fill in the gap with another animal that's related but not the exact same species? So coding is useful to help us get there, but it doesn't give us all the answers.
I see. All right, let's move on to another question. For Jonathan in Pompton Plains, New Jersey, Hillville School. Why do you research monkeys?
Great question. Well, I love monkeys and other primates because they're very similar to humans. So humans are primates and all the monkeys and apes are primates. And so they're very similar to us. So if we're trying to understand humans, it's helpful to compare to other primates so we can figure out what's different about us and how DNA sequence maybe actually plays a role in how we're different and how we're similar. And so I study monkeys as models to better understand humans. So looking at human disease and human behavior, monkeys are very good models for all of that information.
Great. How do you say there are two different microbes with coding from Najib in India?
Great question. Well, when we study microbes, we're studying a piece of their DNA sequence. So we're studying a piece of their genome. And we usually use the 16S ribosomal RNA sequence, which is a piece of a gene that all bacteria and all archaea have. Not all microbes, excuse me there. So all bacteria and all archaea have this 16S ribosomal RNA gene. So it's conserved among many different species. And if we can look at the sequence of two different bacteria and say, oh, this sequence looks the same, then they're probably the same bacterium. If it looks different, then they're definitely different organisms. And so we look at the sequences and we use coding to compare those sequences and find differences or similarities. And when we find a difference, we know that we have two different species.
And one of the reasons why we do coding, and it's so helpful, is that it's extremely powerful and it can do things that would ordinarily take a very long time. So like I'm assuming that these bits of genetic code, these sequences are very long.
Some of them are, but sometimes they're very short, but we have 25 million of them.
Yes.
And so for me to look at 25 million sequences by hand would take an enormous amount of time, but through coding, maybe it would take hours or maybe a day or two. And so that really cuts down on the amount of time it takes me to categorize and figure out which pieces of DNA match and which ones don't. And then once the code tells me which ones match, then I can say, okay, well, these are all the same. So I'm just going to put those over in this bin. And the ones that are different, then I can study in more detail and figure out why they're different and which species they maybe do match.
Okay, great. Eddie in Pompton Plains, New Jersey, Hillville School would like to know, how many microbes do you find in one swab?
Great question. Well, we have a lot of different microbes that live on us. You probably have trillions and trillions of microscopic organisms all over your body. So depending on the place you swab, depending on how recently you showered or washed your hands or washed that area, you might have more or less microbes. And I would say you have millions and millions of cells, say, on your hand. On your hand, there are probably 500,000 microscopic cells. But the number of species on your hand is maybe 100 different species. So even though there are 500,000 different cells, a lot of those are the same species. And so we are taking a swab sample of that, and then we sequence all of the microbes that live on our hand, let's say, and then we compare their sequences to figure out how many different organisms we have. And so like I said, maybe there are 50 to 100 different organisms on your hand.
Very interesting. And I think one last question for this segment to wrap it up. From Nico in Hillville Elementary School, Pequonnock, New Jersey again. What is the thing you like the most about coding?
what do I like the most about coding? So many good opportunities. I would say that it lets me do my research in a timely manner so I can get a lot of information and compare a lot of details in a very short amount of time that I couldn't do by hand. So it really gives me a lot of power to analyze my data better.
You can kind of set it and forget it, and then you have the
Yeah, that's
answers.
true. I can set it and come back 8 hours later and I'm actually doing work while the computer's running.
Yes.
So my computer is doing my work for me.
Yeah, while you
Yes.
get your coffee.
Right.
It's
Or
fantastic.
take a nap.
All right, so we're going to move on to our final researcher for today. We have Eric Lund. He's from the Paleo Lab here at the museum. We're going to learn a little bit about him, and then he'll join me here to answer your questions live. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and something about your favorite projects that you've been working on?
I am Eric Lund, Paleontology Lab Manager here at the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences. One of my favorite projects that I'm currently working on is this 66 million year old Triceratops skull that we collected from eastern Montana. And currently, I am working to remove all of the matrix that surrounds it and expose the bone.
How has coding helped you in your field?
Many ways. One of those is trying to figure out the historical relationships between dinosaurs. Another is creating 3D models. So we scan surfaces and then we can make 3D models of the dinosaurs.
Are there any big questions or mysteries in your field that someone with coding experience might be able to help you answer?
There are many questions that we still don't have the answer to. And one of those is how many dinosaurs were there really? And coding can help us figure that out.
Okay, here we are live with Eric. Eric, we have some questions coming in for you. Remember, this is the time to send them if you haven't already. Let's get the ball rolling here with how did you learn coding? And did you find it to be hard?
Yes, I did find coding to be hard, and I, like our other guests, sort of learned it on my own, sort of as a necessity to help with my research. So it was sort of, I did take a class in university, sort of helped me to get the ball rolling, but really I had to do a lot of the learning on my own.
Yes. So, and that's a really common theme. And there are a couple reasons for that. One is that many schools do not require computer program. That's not part of the curriculum. And that's if you're getting into the sciences, that can be a bit difficult because you're going to do computer programming, or computer programming is involved in all the fields of science. So again, even though that's unfortunate for a lot of people, if you're someone who thinks they might be interested in it or interested in going into the sciences, that's another good reason to learn it, because again, there are going to be few others that have that skill. So if you can acquire it on your own by taking classes at your school or at maybe your local community center or online from a website like code.org, that's really going to give you a great advantage. And even if you know you're going to be taking it in school, it still is a good idea to learn it at home first, because how would you rather learn something like a brand new language, like a brand new computer language? Would you rather learn it first in a classroom and take quizzes and tests, or would you rather learn it in your bedroom in your pajamas? Which do you think would be easier and more fun for you? I'm just saying. Okay, so we have some questions coming in here. The first one here is from Griffin in Hillville Elementary School at Pequonnock, New Jersey. And I'm sorry, I'm probably never going to pronounce that correctly. Is there one dinosaur that you code most, and why?
One dinosaur. Well, my specialty are the horned dinosaurs, like Triceratops. So all of the coding that I do has to deal with those groups of dinosaurs. But if I'm writing a paper, say I'm describing a new species of horned dinosaur, I guess that is an instance where I'm coding one dinosaur. But really, my coding compares morphological characters, so shape, across a whole group of dinosaurs. And so that's how I'm using my coding.
Very cool. Okay, some more questions here. Let's see. I don't know if that's correct. Class 4 Bud. Is that correct? Okay. Class 4 Bud. From Hillville School in Pompton Plains, New Jersey. Have you found rare skulls? And how hard is it to search for fossils?
Yes, I have found rare skulls. In fact, I've been part of research to describe several new species of horned dinosaur over the last, say, 5 to 10 years. One of my favorites is a dinosaur called Nasutoceratops from southern Utah. And as far as finding fossils, it depends on where you're going. So for vertebrate fossils like I find, it is very hard to find them. I could go out in the field and spend an entire day without finding anything. And then sometimes I can spend just one afternoon and find a whole bunch. So it really just depends on what you're looking for and the area that you're looking at.
So do you find rare or unnamed species during every expedition at some point?
Not always. A lot of the times we're finding just pieces of those dinosaurs, so not necessarily skulls. So if you're specifically looking for pieces of skulls, then it is very difficult because dinosaur skulls aren't held together very well by connective tissues. So during the process of fossilization, they tend to fall apart, get scattered, get broken up. And so they're very hard to find. Whereas other parts of the body, like very robust limb bones, those tend to stick around a lot longer, and we tend to find those more.
Oh, interesting. Okay. All right, let's see here. Chase R. in Hillville Elementary School, and again, Pequonnock, New Jersey. Have you found any new dinosaurs using code?
Yeah, so as I said before, the coding that I do is to try to find the historical relationships between dinosaurs. And so I will take a large matrix of data and put it into, and code that into a program. And it will compare, the computer will then compare all the differences between these dinosaurs. And my hopes is that it will find a new species of dinosaur, and it will say that this dinosaur that you found and are coding for is indeed different than all other dinosaurs that have come before.
So is that the result of scans?
So sometimes, but it's mostly the result of me just looking at the fossils and actually doing a lot of in-person visualization of those fossils and coding for a character that's either present or absent.
Oh, okay. All right. Let's see. Okay. All right. Some tough names here. Gorkum Bilgan? I apologize. Can coding help to find a fossil under the earth, so under the ground?
Yeah, and we've tried to do that before. So coding will come in the form of using technology. So geophones is one example of that, in trying to be able to get a picture of what is underneath the soil that we can't see on the surface. So in that sense, coding can help us through technology to find dinosaurs under the ground.
So are those devices using sonar?
They are using sonar, some of them, yeah.
Okay, all right. So if you've heard of sonar, if you haven't heard of sonar, maybe you've heard of echolocation. So in that situation, you've got a speaker essentially that's emitting a pitch that can penetrate through the ground. And if it hits something particularly hard, like a fossil, it's going to bounce back as an echo. And then there's a microphone that's going to pick up that echo. And then it can measure how far it is. And I guess if you do that over enough area, it can also give you like an image map of what's underground.
Yep, exactly.
Looking for. Very cool. All right, so let's see here. Alberto. Oh wow. In Hitsquirt Middle School, Oklahoma. I'm sure that's perfect. What's the most fun part about coding?
For me, the most fun part about coding is actually getting it to run.
When it works.
And it works, yeah. It actually gives you an answer. So for me, it's being able to write a piece of code and get it to do what you want it to do. And it may not give me the answer that I thought I was going to get, but that's perfectly fine. As long as I get an answer and I'm getting data and being able to analyze that data.
Yes, it's extremely satisfying when something, could be anything, you've made actually works, especially if it's complicated. Let's see here. Okay. Najib, in India, what do you find on the skeleton of dinosaurs by coding? How's that help?
So I think one way that a piece of technology that has become more prevalent in paleontology is scanning. And so we're able to make surface scans or even just take a whole bunch of pictures and stitch those pictures together. And this will help us be able to look at these fossils in a different way and be able to interpret, maybe see something about that fossil that we didn't see before, with our own eyes or we can also use different wavelengths of light. So we can shine lasers at the surface of the fossils, and that'll give us a different way to look at the fossils. So we've been able to find some different characters that way.
Yes, and so when you're taking pictures of the fossils, all around the fossils, dozens of pictures, then you're making a 3D model out of that you can rotate on the screen,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And then one of the things that he can do that we like to do here a lot is then 3D print it, which is a lot of fun, because then you can make it larger, you can make it smaller,
Yeah.
examine it a lot more safely, and let other people handle it too. Okay, let's see here. Jake in Hillville Elementary School, Pequannock, New Jersey. How long have you been working on the bone you just showed us? So I guess that Triceratops skull.
Yeah, so the work surrounding that Triceratops began way back in 2016. That's when it was first found. And we started excavating it from the hillside that it was in. That took 2 years. So that was 2017 to 2018. And then the actual fossil prep, so removing the rock that surrounds that bone, started in 2019, and I'm still working on it today.
And if you're ever in North Carolina, in the Raleigh area, one of the things that's very unique about this museum is many of our research labs, including Eric's lab, is enclosed in glass. And so you can actually look in and see everyone doing their research. I can see right now, I can see that even that Triceratops skull from right where I'm sitting, because this lab has glass walls and his lab has glass walls. So that's one of the cool things about this museum. So you can see a lot of the work being done. And there are certain times when you can ask some questions too. Okay, all right. So what we're going to do now is we're going to move into our final session where we're going to have everyone on and answer any final questions that anyone might have for any of the researchers here. Now, I do want to mention that one of the researchers, we had a mix-up that was going to be here was Dr. Roland Case. He'll be here during the next virtual field trip. So if you see his name in a couple places, just know that he will be on the next one. So I'm going to transition here to the next scene. I'm going to bring up the names of the researchers so you can collect your questions and post them, and then we'll answer them live and then wrap up with some concluding statements. So thank you again. We'll be right back. Okay, let's see here. We're back now. Make sure everything's good. Oh, okay. I hope everyone can hear us okay. There, okay. Now everyone should be able to hear us. Okay, so now we're back. And so now we're going to answer some final questions here. Let's see. Are those the most recent?
Yes. Yeah, so I think a good question that came up earlier, but it's good for all the researchers here, is why did you choose your field? I guess we can start with Julie.
Okay, well, I sort of got into this a little bit before, but I chose the field of genetics because it challenged me, and I like a challenge. And I felt like I was a detective when I was doing genetic work, trying to figure out how are DNA sequences different, how does that make one change in one person or one disease in someone and not in another. So that was what really excited me about my field. So you have to have passion for your field, and I was really passionate and excited about genetics.
All right, Patrick.
I got into astronomy basically in high school. I took my first real physics class, and I really enjoyed physics because I felt like it allowed you to predict what was going to happen in reality, right? So if you threw a ball, you knew exactly where it was going to land. If you knew enough about it, you could predict where it would land. And then I took an astronomy class in high school, and I realized it was just physics in space, and I was just kind of sold on that because space, everything in space is awesome.
I agree. Eric.
Yeah, so dinosaurs are amazing. They're awesome. So I've always wanted to study dinosaurs. So ever since I was 4 years old, and my wife likes to say that I never grew up.
Yeah, so museums are kind of a unique place because they bring people from all professions, all the different sciences together under one roof to work. And museums, like pretty much everywhere else, do have people who do computer programming. So when you think about computer programming, we hope that you don't just think about like video games, maybe people doing accounting, things like that. There are people from all walks of life, in all different careers, some that are very, very exciting that do computer programming.
Yes, so a couple other questions. Speaking of video games, Jackson from Ohio asked if anyone has ever coded a game before. And I can say personally I have. I know Matthew has as well, and we actually teach classes here on learning how to code, and we like to use video games for that because most of us like to play some sort of video game. I guess, has anyone else in the room coded a video game before?
I actually have. In high school, I had a Texas Instruments, a TI-85 calculator, and it had like really limited like coding ability in it, and I ended up coding essentially an asteroids game on my calculator.
Fantastic. Yes, that's something that maybe not everyone knows about. Eventually in school, you often end up getting a graphing calculator for some of your classes. And those Texas Instrument graphing calculators have a coding language built inside of them, BASIC and assembly, and I think there are some other languages now. And I remember doing the same thing in school. They were fantastic. You could write your own programs to help you with your homework, or you could write little video games or download little video games. They're absolutely fantastic. Do you ever do anything like that, Julie?
I have not yet, but I'm gonna have to borrow my daughter's calculator now and try it out.
Or look at the games.
Yeah.
Yeah, why don't we do that too?
But yeah, Aaron's right. It's a fantastic way to learn how to do coding because when you're just starting out. Because I mean, everyone likes video games, and if you're the one who's making it, it can be exactly the way you want it to be.
Great. So another good question. It's asking about what are the best colleges or universities for coding. And I don't know if everyone would agree here, but I think basically wherever you're at or at home, like you don't even have to go to a college or university to learn coding. And I think that's one of the most important things to know is that you can start now learning to code by all these online resources, especially like we recommend code.org, and we have for a long time. That's a great place to go and get started. You can learn everything there, and then almost any college or university you go to will have computer coding classes there available. And you're learning the same language, so I wouldn't say one is necessarily better than another.
Yeah, what I think you need to be most concerned about when you're looking at universities is to find a university, regardless of what its name is, where it is, that has the most, of all the ones that are possible for you, the one that has the most amount of options, insofar as that have most amount of classes that involve what you're interested in. So you get as much exposure and have as many opportunities as possible. Of course, you're going to hear about universities like MIT for computer programming and engineering, and that's great, and there are other great ones like it. But really, it really comes down to what's easiest for you, what's most convenient for you to get into, and what has the most opportunities. Does anyone have any opinions on that?
No, I think learning it any way you can is really good. Yeah.
I mean, there are, of course, you're going to find job applications that do have requirements to say you need to have a degree in such a, particular degrees to meet those qualifications. However, it still is worth trying because in some cases the person who's trying to hire someone, if you can convince them that you have the skills, they don't always really care how you got those skills. And because many people learn computer programming on their own, a lot of people know that that's how a lot of people learn it. And so if you do learn it on your own, and if you can build up a portfolio that you can keep online, where you can actually save your code on websites like GitHub, then the person the place that you're trying to get into, as long as they can see that, as long as you can bring it to the interview, then they might be able to look past that. What else do we have?
I was going to add one thing too. So when I was learning coding, it helped me to have a goal. So not just try to learn new scripting or new syntax, but have a goal. I want to create this video game, or I want to create this program. That'll help push you to learn new techniques. And so definitely have a goal and look at other opportunities, and try and create a video game in a new language maybe. Is one goal, or maybe hook up with a researcher. There are a lot of citizen science opportunities where scientists are looking for people who can help them analyze data, and sometimes that requires coding. So I have a project on the zooniverse.org website where we're always looking for students who can help us analyze our data and maybe do some coding to help us analyze it faster and better. And so if you have a goal in mind like that, you can connect with a researcher and say, hey, I'd like to get interested, I'm interested in research, I'd like to do some of what you're doing. Can I do some coding and learn coding while I can also help you? Because that'll get you a good recommendation, but also a really good goal where you're trying to have an end product that'll push you to learn the language better.
Yeah, excellent point. Learning coding can be very, very difficult. It was difficult for me. But if you can link it with something else that you're really interested in, whether it's playing games or whether it's anything having to do with the natural sciences, then you're going to care more about learning it. You're going to care more about finishing that project. The more you can link up your interests into learning a new skill, the more motivated you are to do that on your own.
Yes. All right. So we're gonna hop around with some quick questions for our researchers. So the first one is, where have you found the most dinosaurs?
That's a great question. So most of my work has been done here in North America, and specifically in Western North America, in Utah, New Mexico, and Montana. And so those are the three places I found most of the dinosaurs.
All right, great answer there. Next question, talking about astronomy. Do you think you will discover any new planets soon?
Not myself, because I don't study planets. But we did, a few years ago, we published a paper where we found a new type of galaxy. And that my collaborator and I published that a while ago. But there's so much data out there in astronomy, just archival data, that people can't even sift through it. So I'm sure somebody's going to find something else just that happens to already be there that nobody's seen yet.
Someone using a new program that they wrote.
Yeah, probably.
To sift through it all.
All right, another quick question on dinosaurs. Have you ever found a fully formed dinosaur remains? So, like, have you ever found a complete skeleton?
Complete skeletons are very few and far between. So most of the things that I found are just pieces. And at that, they're just isolated pieces of a particular dinosaur. So it's quite hard to find a complete thing. I found a lot of a particular dinosaur. For example, this past summer we were in New Mexico, and I found probably about 40% of a duckbill dinosaur. But to find 100% complete is very, very difficult.
Very good question. Another question about biology here. Can coding help with finding vaccinations for viruses?
So actually, there are some programs. There is a program called Foldit that actually looked at how proteins fold, and so it used computer imaging and actually the public to try and figure out how we could actually fold proteins. So potentially, they were thinking about using that for the messenger RNA vaccines to try and make the vaccines better and look at how folding and interactions might work. So yes, so they actually are very relevant to a lot of aspects of biology. Coding is great.
Great answer.
Before we move on to the next one, Dr. Horvath mentioned Foldit. Yes, that's something that you all can look up on your own. It's fold.it is the website. It's a program that you can download. It's a citizen science type program where you can learn about protein folding, but also when you're doing it, you're helping the researchers with it. We've had it here in the lab. It's a really cool. It's like if you like puzzles, you're gonna like Foldit a lot.
Yes, and we'll add links to this, the document page that goes out, and to the description of this video after it's done, so you can learn more about helping with citizen science and being involved with coding in that way. So we got a few minutes left. Another good question here. What's the coolest thing you learned on your job by coding? This is kind of for everyone. So, like, what's the one thing, if you could only tell someone one thing you learned by coding, what would it be? So we can start over here to start
Yeah,
there.
I'll start. So for me, it's just figuring out those historical relationships among horned dinosaurs. So that's the coolest thing that coding has helped me do.
It's hard to pick something. For me, I think that, I mean, really the coolest thing about coding is that it helps you find things that nobody's seen yet. Just in general, right? I mean, you know, the galaxies that I look at, I mean, essentially nobody's looked at them before, and I get to look at them in depth. And I'm the first one to see this stuff, and the coding helps me kind of break them apart and figure out what's going on with them. And I think that's pretty cool.
Great answers. I have to follow suit and say, yeah, there are so many opportunities. I can't really pick one. In the genetics realm, I'd say I have a passion for lemurs. You know, I like primates, but in this current time, the Duke Lemur Center, which is down the road from us, has a lot of different lemurs. And one of the questions they asked was whether the lemurs are susceptible to COVID-19. And it turns out by using coding and analyzing some of the genome sequence of the lemurs, we found out which lemurs were more susceptible than others, so that the zoos and primate centers could actually, you know, be more careful with those lemurs and make sure that they were creating more safety measures for them. So, for example, ring-tailed lemurs that you probably see in zoos are very susceptible to getting sick with COVID-19. And so that's something really relevant that coding of the genome sequences helped us solve. And then in terms of microbiology, I love learning about which microbes live on you and how they produce your body odor and, you know, help keep you safe from disease. So just studying all the microbes that live on you and understanding why humans are different than other primates, I find that really fascinating. And coding has helped me tremendously in that.
So computer programming, the sciences, allow these researchers to discover things that hadn't been discovered before. And so it's extremely powerful.
Yeah, so there were a lot of questions today we didn't get to answer. Unfortunately, we only had so much time. We will be putting links after this for all the researchers if you wanted to reach out and contact them and ask them questions. And also remember, we're doing this again in about a month. So you can join us for that if you have a question that didn't get answered today, and you can ask that again.
Yeah. So thank you all for joining us here today. Really glad to have this opportunity for our researchers to talk to you all and answer your questions. Just remember, computer programming, it can be very, very intimidating. It sounds intimidating. However, it's like anything else. I'm sure that many of you have played computer games. They're just as complicated as computer programming is in the beginning. And it's just like anything else. You just start small and take your time with it, and don't get so frustrated that you quit it. Because the more you do it, it's going to slowly make sense. Or maybe for some of you, it would be very quick. I know it was slow for me. However, it's totally worth it in the end, because once you get comfortable enough with it, it becomes, you can almost, once you're able to think like a programmer, it becomes very, very natural. And you can just start writing just in your head before you even start typing it on the screen. And at that point, it becomes a lot of fun, because then you can just make whatever you want just by sitting down and typing it out. So if you're looking for languages to start with, we mentioned Python is a very powerful one. It's used in the sciences. It can be pretty difficult to start with if you've never used one to begin with. If you're quite young, one of our favorites to begin with is called Scratch. So many of you have probably heard of it before. If you haven't, it's a free online program that you can use that's very, very visual. It uses almost like little puzzle pieces. That's another good place to start if you're quite young. So yes, we're big fans of computer programming here. We use it a lot. We use it to make discoveries. We use it to teach with, but it's also a lot of fun. So thank you all for joining us today at the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences. I am Matthew, and this is Aaron, and we'll see you again possibly in about a month. Thank you all. Take care.